practical. Keep working on where you're attached. Recognize, what is it that's making me suffer in this moment? What is it that I'm trying to fight, that I'm assuming is over there? I'm assuming it's that guy and their opinions, or it's normally opinions, isn't it? Sometimes it's actions, but most of the time it's something they've said in opinions. What is it about that is making me want to go to war with them, whatever it is, you know? So if we're able to reflect inwards, reflect on our own conditioning, that's where freedom lies for sure. Yeah, it's always lying about what we're stuck to.
We are back. This is episode 27 with the Holocene podcast, and today we have Simon Brown at Awake Here and Now. We had a little bit of a break. I got married. I did post a podcast just after the wedding, actually, but then did a bit of travelling in Sri Lanka with the wife on our honeymoon. I didn't want to record while I was away. I wanted a proper break. As you can see, I've been putting a lot of information out there recently, a lot of episodes. I haven't really missed a week since I started, so I feel like I deserved the break, and that is what I did. We're back now. I had 2 interviews this week, so got another one to post next week. Looking forward to posting that as well. This interview was really good, actually. This what I found. Some of the interviews that I've done have been almost exactly what I need to hear at any given time. So it's almost like a direct reflection of where I am in my research and my life and my personal practices. And I approached Simon because I come across him quite randomly, actually. I was just doing some digging on specific topics that he actually covers, and I found him on YouTube and thought, this guy has such a good way of explaining things like to the layman, really simple, really like to the point of what he's trying to get across. Really calm as well. So I really enjoyed listening to him. So I thought, I've got to get this guy on. Luckily, I managed to secure the podcast. Um, really good. We go into, I'd say more so like practical. Um, I'd say practical practices around awakening. So if anyone is going through any sort of spiritual awakening at the moment, this is definitely one for you. Um, Simon really does, or at least the feeling I got from talking with him, he really does kind of live by what he's saying, and I think you can really sense that in the way that he presents himself and the way he talks. So um, yeah, I think some really good value here. Really pleased to have him on. I hope you enjoy the episode, and as always, please like, share, and subscribe. It just builds the platform up a little bit more and allows me to attract bigger and better guests. So yeah, please share and let us know your thoughts in the comment section. I hope you enjoy.
And thank you for joining me.
My
Um,
pleasure.
I
My pleasure.
I came across your YouTube a little while ago. I've had a bit of a dig through the archive, and I found you quite interesting. This is why I reached out, and finally
Okay.
we've managed to get you on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you talk a lot about sort of spirituality and non-duality, and another topic you talk a lot about is awakening. So I
Yes.
wanted to sort of touch on what your view is of awakening, what your understanding is, and also maybe a bit of information as to what it is that set you on your journey, and where you've been and
Yeah.
what's led you to kind of where you are now, putting videos on YouTube.
Yes. So there's a couple of questions there, isn't there? So you've kind of got like the me, as in how did I come across it? And then you've got maybe, well, what is it actually? Because they're two kind of different things. So should we start with my story? Like a little bit of, I say my story, but a bit of context. I think, yeah, what you pointed to, what set me off on the journey, it was suffering, essentially. It was like quite a
What is
lot
it?
of stuff.
What?
Yeah, I mean, I know it is, isn't it? And like, yeah, so when I was younger, like a child, moving into, especially that crossover period, where you go into secondary school and you start to stand up on your own 2 feet kind of thing. And I just found myself very bad at it, really. I couldn't. it felt like everybody was playing a game that nobody had ever told me about, and I didn't know the rules, and I was having to try and figure out what this game was. You know, the game of social connection, social interaction, which is very much, I guess, that it's like the precursor to this world. You know, the adult life, isn't it? You know, the competitive, semi-competitive
Mm.
world. You know, you're kind of geared into that, aren't you, when you're young, through the school system? And I just didn't get it. I was shit at it, like really bad, and ended up kind of being bullied a little bit, and then realizing, oh, I'm quite a big guy, so I don't need to be bullied, and then so like hitting people back, but none of it brought any pleasure. It wasn't like I was feeling connected. So then when I got into like my late teens, um, I was probably suffering quite a lot. You know, I was just feeling a lot of disconnection day to day. I started smoking weed as well, so just starting to get into like uh, things to take me away from the moment. You know, like to deal with this dissonance, I would start like taking drugs, basically. Um, and my mum could see that there was some, I don't know, anxiety, uneasiness, whatever it was. She saw there was stress in me, and a considerable amount for a 17-year-old. And she used to work with carers, you know, people that look after others that maybe got health issues, mental health issues, whatever. So she provided support for carers. And one of the things that she had as part of that support was a meditation tape. It's in like a little plastic wallet. It's before CDs even existed, I think, actually. So a little plastic wallet, and I had a little ghetto blaster in my room. And she just said, "Have you thought about this, like relaxation meditation?" I was like, "Oh, no, I'd never even heard of that before." So then I put this on, and it gives you really gentle guidance about setting up a meditation space, how to sit, how to engage. And then it was just gentle, you know, like body scan meditation, really,
Yeah.
just like very, very simple, very easy. But actually, as many people who've been on Vipassana retreats will show, very deep, actually, like potentially very deep meditation. So I put this on for the first time, and well, maybe not the first time, but within a couple of efforts, I realized, oh, something else is going on now. Like this is other than what I've been experiencing so far. You know, I didn't know how to describe it, but it really lit a spark in me. Whatever that spark was, I don't know. I think it was probably just a drive to get out of this self-referential suffering and trying to fit in. It was like, oh no, there's something of a different order of magnitude available in experience. And yeah, I had some pretty like deep meditation experiences quite early on. They didn't last, you know. I think it's just beginner's mind, but I remember like experientially thinking, what is this? You know, especially because I'd started on like smoking weed away. I was like, oh
Yeah.
wow, this is like a drug experience sat in a bedroom. Very odd. So that was kind of the beginning of it. Um, like where it went from there is, well, it's tricky. I mean, I had a chat with a friend the other week, and I mentioned a book that I came across at the very beginning of the journey. So, in addition to this, there was a book which I highly recommend for people wanting to know a little bit about Buddhism specifically, called Buddhism Without Beliefs by Stephen Batchelor. And so, obviously, at the time, I'd heard of Buddhism, but it's very Eastern, esoteric. I didn't really get it. It was very culturally understood, and we didn't have the internet then either. This book was just like, right, strip all the culture out, strip all of the exoticism, and just here are the core tenets of Buddhism, just very, very practical. And that kind of peeled me open. It was like hearing my own truth spoken back to me for the first time in my life. I don't know if you've ever had that experience when you read a book, but it just feels like what you're reading is exactly what's here. Do you
Yeah.
know, it's just resonating like hell. I was on a bus on the way to work in a terrible call center, reading this book, just like, yeah, falling apart in a way, just tumbling into, yeah, a doorway to truth, you could say, or like the doorway was beginning to open. So that was the very beginning, really.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, I mean, after that though was a long, problematic, patchy tale of like diving headfirst, coming back out, quite a lot of addiction issues. You know, it seems that suffering wasn't done with me, or I wasn't done with suffering yet. So I thought, let's give it another couple of decades. Just,
Yeah, yeah. This is what I like about your stuff as well, is you very much with a lot of realism.
mm,
It's not like I found this book, did this meditation, and here we are. It
oh
was
yeah,
maybe I put that book down, and then life beat me up a bit, and then
oh
I
yeah,
back and I struggled. I mean,
exactly.
my story is a little bit different than yours. Mine came
Mm.
from waking up, seeing something conspiratorial,
Oh
and
wow, okay.
away is the world like that. And then I just dug and dug, and I went down this.
Yeah, yeah,
What I found kind of halfway down was the sort of stuff you're talking about. So I come across you,
yeah,
and I looked into Buddhism and went
yeah.
to Thailand and went to some temples, went to India,
Mm,
and yeah, kind of got into it that way. But maybe like you, I dipped in and then I dipped out and then dipped back in, and it's been like this ongoing thing. I've
yeah.
actually, sorry to hijack.
No, you're not hijacking all. It's really nice to hear.
I recently got back into meditation again, but more, well, less from a spiritual perspective and more from a practical, like utility perspective.
Yeah,
So I'm very good at letting my mind just run rampant. And like I
yeah,
said, going down rabbit holes, and anyone that's followed my show, we go into some pretty deep topics.
yeah.
So just to like really kind of anchor my
Yes,
attention.
beautiful.
Yeah, just even if it's
Oh God.
15, 20 minutes a day, it's
Yeah,
yeah, I've gone back to the
yeah,
basics. It's
yeah.
weird because you're all the way around and you sort of
Uh-huh.
come back to these
Yeah.
basics. So
I mean, so yeah, well, I mean, I hope you don't mind me going off in a bit of a direction, but actually, you're bringing up something that has been in my heart for quite a while now that I'm noticing is lacking. It's lacking in the talk online of awakening, which is just grounded, simple, mindful practice. Because
mm,
actually, what I'm finding with a lot of the people that I speak to, doing one-to-one sessions in person, that I'm communicating about awakening with, because they've come across a contemporary awakening path. So they've heard someone talk about self-inquiry, and they've started slicing at themselves, trying to cut away all this delusion. What often happens is they've not yet nurtured the skill to be with what arises. Because if you pull that lid off the bottle, a lot of things are going to come up. People don't realize that the self mechanism, and maybe this is where I can talk a bit about what awakening is, but if we start looking underneath what sits underneath the self structure, the self-referential structure of mind, actually there's a lot of conditions or emotional and physical conditioning. And if we don't have a practice to be able to be with that when it arises, it can be very, very confusing, very upsetting. Like I've spoke to people and they're talking about trying to realize, infinite Brahman Godhead, and they can't be with their thoughts for more than 5 minutes. They've not got that just simple skill of patience,
yeah,
and that's not a criticism, but I guess what it kind of points to the times, doesn't it? We've been brought up in this kind of modern hyper gratification reality. Like, I want something, I get it like this, or I can fast track it. But actually, trying to get to the end before going through the, let's say, yeah, it's not a goal to achieve. It's a
yeah.
it's a process, isn't it? It's an unfolding into life. So yeah, doing that kind of practice that you just spoke about, I think is really, really beneficial for people. It can support you so much if you know you've got the ability to be with whatever arises in the body, in the mind, just with gentle patience. That is such a strong anchor, isn't it? It's a really great foundation.
Yeah, and what I've sort of been looking at over the years, really, and like I said, I've gone back to more of a practical sort of process. But whenever I have been meditating, I guess like learning to know what is just nonsense and just let that go, and know what is worth maybe focusing on or leaning into a little bit. So as you
Yes.
said, the sort of things that arise, don't just go, sometimes there's things and it's like an emotion is attached to it. And
That's it.
I think when you get to that space where you're a bit more detached from thought, You can acknowledge yourself being pulled in.
Yeah.
Why is it that I get this feeling in my gut when that popped up, and do you mind sort of explaining sort of your experience with that? Because I think when I've said that, your eyes have lit up. What sort of advice would you give on that?
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I kind of because actually it's quite subtle work, isn't it? So this is why gentle, regular, mindful practice is helpful, because what it does is it allows you to notice it. And I think so. Before we even get to that stage, we need to be able to notice that's what's going on. You just described, oh, something popped up, and then there's a feeling in the pit of the stomach, and there's a thought attached to it. Actually, that's quite a lot of insight. That takes quite a lot of mindfulness. Often we don't even notice that's happening. We just find ourselves in distraction, or trying to take refuge in old habits. So often what will happen, you could say, prior to exploring awakening, we just find ourselves smoking, drinking, trying to avoid, doesn't have to be those things, but trying to avoid these feelings that arise naturally in life. So we don't even notice the feelings. The
Yeah,
reflex response, and it is a reflex response, we're just halfway down the track of trying to gratify ourselves, doing anything we can not to feel this. So we don't even know what the trigger was, didn't even feel the feeling in the stomach, didn't even notice the thought in the mind. We're
yeah,
just out off our tits in a nightclub, as an example.
yeah,
Now, it's a little bit different if you've been practicing for a little while, which I know a lot of people listen to this probably will have. But this is why this simple mindfulness practice really helps, because actually, gentle attention, focus, gentle attention, like you said before, means that when these things arise, you go, oh, there is something here. I'm now noticing that thought that I usually distract myself with, there's a feeling attached to it. I mean, just that, it seems simple, but what a beautiful insight that is, isn't it? So I'm no longer a slave to this thought thinking and believing that it's just random nonsense and I've got to battle it in the mind. You're starting to see, oh, there's a process going on here and it's inviting you into the body. Wow. I mean, that it's such a different order of being to just being here all of the time as a person, isn't it? So
yeah. I think it's even like to be able to sort of isolate it, because
mhm.
I know, like, say for instance, anxiety, right? Anxiety, when you're in it, it's almost like there's not a beginning or an end. It just is this thing that like wraps you up. And it
Mm,
and I think for anyone that suffers from like depression or anxiety, just this, like I said, this practical method of
yeah,
doing meditation, it can allow you to almost like see it happening,
yes.
because anxiety can just be there, and all of a sudden you're wrapped up in this thing, and like I said, there was no beginning. It's just encapsulated you. So I think just being aware of, like, what one thing that I've been doing with my meditation. So I was doing a bit of the transcendental. So I had a mantra and I
Yeah,
was kind of hanging on to
yeah.
that. But what I've been doing is just focus on the breathing, and then I put my attention just literally behind,
Oh yeah,
so maybe like an inch behind.
yeah.
Um, so I'm sort of like trying to focus there, and you notice your mind going. Sometimes you don't even notice it going. You're aware that you're gone,
Mm,
and then you go, right, bring it back, and then you bring
that's
it
it.
back, and then
That's it.
eventually you start to notice when it starts to go.
Yes.
And just, I think, as you say, just to be like aware that that's happening,
Yeah.
and there is no end goal. It's just bring myself back, acknowledge that I did that again, and then
Mhm.
you just have this game of mind going, mind coming back, mind going, mind coming back. I
Yeah.
just feel like that practically, from a practical application, it allows you in your real life, in the real world, every hour of every day, to just be aware of that
It
happening.
does. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, this is so good to mention, Jay. Like, I think it's wonderful because this is the stuff you don't see on YouTube videos because it doesn't sell. Like the regular step by step practice training of the mind. That's not clickbait, is it?
No,
There's no happy finish. Sorry, there's no like you're gonna get the end result. It's not no. It you don't get anything out of it as such. No thing. but
Yeah.
the mind and the body attention learns to be with the moment more and more intimately, like closer and closer to experience, recognizing what's going on in body, speech, thought. We get closer and closer to that. I mean, if you think about, you asked what awakening was before, you could just say freedom. You could say that. I mean, it's a bit kind of glib and a bit short, but you could say freedom, freedom to be in the world without being dragged heedlessly, mindlessly
Yeah.
into either thoughts, feelings, whatever. But that freedom only comes if we can unbind to what's binding us. If you think about, the opposite of freedom is like being chained, being shackled, isn't it? So how do we unchain? Well, we've got to see the chains first. So if you can't even see like the processes of mind and body that you're attached to, how can you let them go? And I think, yeah, so it's not super glamorous what you've just described, but that is a perfect example of just gently training the mind, the attention to be with experience. And like, you'll be surprised how much dividends that can bring. Like, yeah, yeah, really
Yeah.
rewarding.
Yeah, this is what I mean. I've gone all around the houses and I've been into all the higher spiritual stuff.
Mm,
I've just now come back to a really practical, grounded application.
mm,
A quote I read recently, I might be paraphrasing, but a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. So, like when I was in Sri Lanka on my honeymoon,
yeah,
I was in paradise, but I've allowed myself at times
yeah,
to be so in my own head. I might as well be back at home. I might as well be at work because I'm somewhat suffering
yeah,
because it's hot, it's sticky. You in the moment, it's not always pleasant. You look at all these postcards of people traveling, to the tropical climate, and it's like these beautiful palm trees, but there's insects everywhere, and it's noisy and annoying. And I ate something for lunch, and my stomach's hurting again.
yeah.
So many factors. It's hot again. Oh, we've got hours till dinner, and I'm bored. And I was just thinking, why do I do this? But I
Mm,
think that's the human experience, the untrained human experience. I'm hoping that the more I do, the practical side, the more I will just notice that I'm doing that. And
yes,
we just nip it in the bud and go, Jay, you're going to
yeah,
be home in 2 weeks. You're going to be miserable because the weather's rubbish again. Just enjoy it and, just sort of take stock of it. And what I've noticed
yeah.
since I've been doing it practically, I keep going back to the word practically because
Mm,
this is what I'm doing. Um, I'm not seeking some spiritual, enlightenment from that sense. It's just the practicality of it and training the mind. And I've noticed some really, good benefits. So yeah, which I never thought, because when you get into meditation, it's this dude in India, in the ashram and doing mantras and, oh, am I going
mm,
to become enlightened yet?
yeah,
But when you do it practically, you realize that, it is in the moment and it is just controlling that crazy
yeah,
mind of yours. And
yeah.
as you said, just acknowledging, that acknowledgement.
Yeah, beautifully put. Yeah, beautifully put. And you can see, I mean, you've just described the path there, as far as I can see, and you've described beautifully the human condition of mind identification, the belief in the moment that there's something. I'm going to point up here, but it's not up here, the mind, is it? But, the thinking mechanism, the belief that that can get you out of this,
Mm,
where there's only ever been this. And that's happening in this anyway. Like you can't actually go anywhere, can you? Other than, like you said, desensitize to the present moment,
yeah,
desensitize in, and exactly the right term, isn't it? If you think about sensitivity, using the senses, being in the senses, you desensitize, move away from the sensory field into the imagined realm of thought, which is, how can I make this situation better for an imagined me? And the only real way to do that is either to imagine a past, so dive into memory, or imagine a future and plan the great escape, whatever it's going to be. If it's too hot, like, or plan. It's like, oh well, it's too hot now. If I think about an ice cream, even a thought of it, it's so alluring, isn't it? That even a thought of it, it's like, oh, that does that feel nice? I'm hot, but I'm thinking about an ice cream, and it's like, oh, well, I'm imagining that that's preferable to now, but it's simply a thought. It's no different to the thought about putting a stamp on a letter. Ultimately, is it? It's exactly the same stuff. Just I'm going to do something in future, and all you've got is this moment, just calling, really calling us back to it, just saying, yeah, come here, come back, and like you're noticing, oh, okay, yep, there I go. And then this is where the training comes in. It's like, well, you know what coming back feels like now because you've been gently training with it. Well, actually, the training is so that we can put it into practice, isn't it? We put it into practice in life, just everyday life.
Yeah. The thing, like if you look into Buddhism, it's like the acknowledgement of suffering. I know that's one aspect,
That's the first noble truth. Yeah.
but it kind of is, because the moment, like right now, is all you really have.
Hmm.
But holding on to it is like holding on to like a slippery bar of soap, because your mind's just here, there. You hold on to that soap, it's slipped off. That's what your mind's doing all the
Yeah.
time. So it's almost like banter. All you've got is now, but you can't actually live there because I've
Yeah.
given you this mind and it's just
Yeah.
chaos. And the
Yeah.
mind never, well, I don't know about yours, but mine never really like goes into this imaginary, conjuring up the future
Yeah.
in a positive way. I have to work on that. It's always negative. And when
Yeah.
I go back to the past, I don't just have, like when you're laying there, you've woken up in the morning, but you're sort of trying to snooze, and these thoughts pop into your mind. It's never, for me, well, it's never easily, oh, I remember that holiday. It was brilliant. It's always something I did that made me feel stupid, or something that was horrible in the past. So it's only, I don't know, it's like hardwired into us that there's just this level of just negativity.
Well, it's often shame. It's often feels like shame and regret, isn't it? And yeah, those kind of when we're looking back, the things that seem to plague us and perpetuate suffering in the moment, it's these feelings of shame and regret. And this is another, and again, it might not sound super spiritual to people listening or super awakening-y, but there's a reason why all Eastern spiritual traditions start with ethical action. They all start with ethical action. So especially in Buddhism, they don't really even teach meditation until you turn your mind towards ethics. I'm not talking about morals, not talking about a set of morals that you achieve or you abide by. We're talking about living your life ethically and recognizing the consequences of your action. Just that simple. What am I doing? What am I saying? And why am I doing it?
Yeah.
So stay there. And often the regrets that we have and the shame that we feel is because we've lived unethically, unaware of those three things most of our life. So then they naturally they will come back to play out in our minds. As you can imagine, though, if you live a life that is ethically clean, let's say, I'm not saying there's no perfect. It's not like an attainment. You don't get to a top level, but you're very close to experience and you know what you've done, why you've done it, and the effect that it has.
Yeah.
You know, then if you live a life that doesn't hurt people, doesn't mistreat people, doesn't sexually like abuse people, doesn't lie, doesn't steal, don't murder,
Yeah.
don't kill. If you live a life like that, there's a lot less regret. It's just very simple. So then the mind is way freer to explore, or the attention's way freer to explore states of deep concentrated freedom, because we're not being plagued by these after echoes of regret, and it's definitely been the case for me. Like I've had to, yeah, look, working on my actions and how I am in the world has been, I would say, the most important thing to my awakening
Yeah.
and the most important thing to me finding freedom. No matter how deep the meditation got, no matter how deep the insight got, and until the actions were fully acknowledged and uh, yeah, I worked with them effectively, there was no real
So
freedom there.
forgive as well. Is that a part of your practice of sort of forgiving? Look, I was
For sure.
young, I was foolish,
For sure. Yeah, there's no blame. There's never any blame. It's not a question of good or bad. So, like in Buddhism, they often use the term skillful or unskillful. Now, the Western mind likes to go, oh, skillful's good, unskillful's bad. That's just like naturally how we do it because we're so conditioned. But it's not about that, really. It's just like skillful actions perpetuate ease, peace, and kindness.
Mm.
Unskillful actions keep us bound to suffering and perpetuate suffering in the world. So, yeah, you can just look back and go, oh, look, there was a lack of skill there. That's nobody's fault. But now I can acknowledge that and learn to be skillful. So, like you said, I can forgive myself for not knowing any better, and I can move towards more skillful action in the world. So, and again, it's not sexy stuff, this is it. This isn't like deep no self, ninth jhana, transcendental universe folding into emptiness talk. It's just nuts and bolts, isn't it? It's like day by day, nuts and bolts. How are you living? What you're doing? What's the effect?
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised. Well, I mean, what you're describing is exactly that. It has a profound effect on people's well-being, like profound, way more profound than any single insight you can have.
Yeah, I really like what you just said actually, and hopefully that can segue into the next part, which is
Mm.
like the enemy is self, which was the next question I wanted to, well, the next point I wanted to go into with you.
Yes.
But you know, when you're going day by day, you know, about your business, the decisions that you're making and the reactions that you're putting out there,
Mm.
maybe I don't do this on a conscious level, but I've learned over the years exactly what you've just said, living with the regret and the shame. Shame's a massive one.
Oh
So
yeah.
I don't consciously think, will I feel shameful by this action? But
Mm.
I do think over the years I've built like more of a subconscious understanding that, you know, of the things that I'm going to do, I'm going to do it based on my moral code, which I've shaped in line with what lessons I've learned in the past by feeling shamed. And
Yes.
essentially, you don't do things necessarily because you don't want the physical consequence. It's more, am I going to feel ashamed of this? Because ultimately, in the cold, you know, light of day, it's, or even in the dark of night, actually, that's probably a better way to put it.
Yeah.
That shame is what's going to sort of, it's going to get you at some point, you know, when you are tossing and turning at night, or when you do try meditation, or you go for long walks, or you put your phone down for 5 minutes and you're left with your thoughts. It's wrapped up in that emotion, and it's coming. It's going to come eventually. You can drink all you want and do your drugs and
Yeah.
try and avoid it, but it will one day. It will get you, I think. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think you made a really good point there.
Yeah, I think what's important to recognize as well is there's a couple of different types of shame which don't really get spoken about. So you've got inherited shame from early childhood, often toxic shame, excuse me, that we experience through our primary caregivers. It's nothing to do with us. You know, if you're deeply shamed from the ages of 0 to 10, as an example, you're made to feel shameful just for being alive, you know, like you're too extra, you're too much trouble, like the things that you say are stupid, you're ignorant, you know, the kind of terms that are
Mm.
not uncommon. A lot of people listening might remember those terms from their parents and when they were younger. That's deeply painful, and I think it's a type of shame that is different to the moment by moment shame we can feel because of our actions, you know. So it's worthwhile separating those two out, because that type of shame, that toxic shame, it lives very deep and it's very difficult to access, so we need to be gentle with that. But there's a different healthy type of shame called, well, in uh, Pali, in Indian language of Pali, it's called hiri. And hiri is healthy shame that acts as a guardian for the heart. It's basically seen of one of the guardians of the Dharma. Hiri sometimes takes a form as like a Dharma protector. And that's that feeling of regret when you do something shit.
Mm.
Like, it's a natural part of being human. So if I hurt you and I see I hurt you, I will feel that. However, we become so disconnected often from the present moment. It just gets buried underneath coping mechanisms. Rather than feel that, I'll just have another pint, smoke another joint, do whatever coping mechanism I've got. But it's just a natural guidance, you could say, emotional, energetic guidance, that if you put shit into the world, you will feel it. Like, just pay attention, you'll feel it. Like, and then go, ow, oh, why did that happen? And just a bit of gentle inquiry will bring about, oh yeah, it's because I like punched that hippo or something. I don't know, whatever it was. Like, yeah.
It's a hippo.
I mean, that's quite a brave. It's a brave thing to
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Do you think that, like, I spent a lot of time looking at the ego. You see our guy's always doing his hair, cares about his hair, it's the ego. It's a real low level way to look at it.
Yeah.
Going into, like, say, your childhood trauma, for instance, I think that's a closer, like, that gives you a better understanding of what the ego really is. So it could be, for instance, as a child you were ignored, for instance,
Yeah.
and you're out with your friends and you're trying to voice something and they're just sort of ignoring you and laughing at something or talking about football, but you're trying to,
Yeah.
share something, and all of a sudden this ego, which is like, your shadow self, which is there to protect this inner child, and a lot of people are disconnected from this, so they don't really know why they hit out until they do the work.
Yeah.
But then you sort of hit out, and then, because your ego has stepped in now, because it's just seeing you as a 10-year-old boy who experienced this as his worldview.
Yeah.
And then you hit out and you say something horrible, or whatever you do, you punch a hippo, whatever it is you do. And then once that's all calmed down, and you're embarrassed later, and you have that shame. Why, I can't believe I did that. But most people at that point, they don't put two and two together and do that sort of inner work. They blame the other person, or they just have another drink and, I'll forget about that, and just push it aside. So it's almost like your reaction to the world is probably what you should be studying, which
Yes.
will then give you a better insight as to what's really going on, inside, and why you have those reactions.
I love it. So beautiful, Jay. Yeah. I mean, because that's all we've got, isn't it? That is all we've got. Our own reactions to the world, our own way of perceiving the world, and how we operate within it. I can never know what's going on for you. I can ask you and you can tell me, but all I get to experience is this reactivity, this protection, this like machoism, whatever shows up in the moment. So like you said, actually the key to not just my happiness in the world, but also connecting more deeply with others is exploring what's going on here. But it's very hard to do, you know, especially because it's not promoted. I say promoted, not just outside of the field of awakening, especially as a man in the West. You know, um, it's it's a toxic dialogue that goes on, like that image of manliness, maleness, or whatever. It's so enclosed and disconnected from these feelings of, like you said, shame, or you also just talked about a 10-year-old child. Well, a 10-year-old child is deeply vulnerable, isn't it? Vulnerable to hurt, wanting love. Can you imagine having that conversation down a football pitch, like when you're at Man United on a Saturday? It just doesn't kind of happen, does it? So then what happens is you get record numbers of men taking their own life in the UK, more so than any other demographic. Young men are like the highest, as far as I know, at least recently, like the highest demographic of people committing suicide or completing suicide in the UK. And this kind of environment, that's kind of why, because there's no outlet. You see, have these feelings of deep regret and shame, vulnerability that never get tapped into, and all they get met with in society is competitiveness. So actually, my apparent friend, the person I've known all my life, as soon as I start talking about this, they just kind of like think I'm a bit weird, potentially, and then they go into kind of some competitive braggadocio exchange. Maybe they start ribbing me, start a bit of banter, and actually all this time you've got this part of you just withering. Just it's calling out for connection, and it isn't getting it. And I know it isn't my experience now. It has been my experience in the past, as a man growing up in the UK. That isn't for me to say that many men in the UK are hard done by. I mean, in a lot of ways, we've got it easier than pretty much anyone else, especially as a white male in the UK. But with regards to that, that aspect of, yeah, like you said, ego, male ego, and finding freedom from that. Yeah, it's problematic for sure, isn't it? And it's a very tricky thing to get out of, because I don't know if it's been the same for you, but for me, I felt like, well, I have to try harder. I have to be more manly, more macho. I've got to compete more. I've got to win, because that's the only way I can get out of this, get better at it. I didn't
Yeah.
realize there was a third option. There was a different way of being. I didn't even see that was available for a long time.
Yeah, I think going back to the simple nuts and bolts of it again is acknowledging,
Yeah.
just acknowledging I've done that. I hit out, I did that thing again. And then you build a picture, you build a pattern of it, or you start to notice a pattern and you build a picture.
Yeah.
Oh, I do that when this one topic arises for some
Yeah.
reason. I mean, you start digging. You mentioned about, being in the Western world and being a man, we've got it the
Mm.
easiest, which in many ways I agree. But I do feel that there has been a change of late where, because you're a white male in the West, you're not allowed to say, you're not allowed to
Yeah.
have moan, or you're not allowed to feel. So
Yeah.
equally, that's just perpetuating it.
Yes. Yeah. 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 It's not even, is it? It's definitely not a caring way to invite conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's
No,
really dualistic. It's like it's an either or. Either you've got it better, or you've got it worse. Well, it's none of those. That's not the truth. Is way more complicated than that, isn't it? So in a
well,
lot
going
of
back to
ways, we've got.
me, oh, sorry, going back to me when I was in paradise,
Yeah.
my, the environment to some degree doesn't really matter, because
Mm.
you're still in your own head. And
Yeah.
you're still a human being, you've still experienced things. Maybe you haven't been in a war-torn, country where
Yeah.
you've seen
Yeah.
people you love be, killed, but stressing about paying the mortgage and having debt collected, these things are, it's all it's as, you can only be as sort of traumatized as what you're experienced to.
Yeah.
So in some ways, the worse you have it, the stronger you become. It's weird, way that it works. So it's like, you've got it so good you can't moan. But that's just shutting down. That's that thing, as you said about the masculine thing. It's
Yeah.
shutting it down and not allowing you to express yourself. You
Yeah.
could be a multimillionaire, but you still have,
So,
these issues that, everyone else does. We're all human beings having this experience, I guess.
yeah. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head there, haven't you? Because, like, actually, that's the truth of suffering, or the truth of mind identified suffering. It is regardless of race, religion, like sexuality, orientation, any of those things. That's not it. That's not what it's dependent upon. It's dependent upon the erroneous belief, multiple beliefs, but really the erroneous belief that I am a separate entity to everything else. So as long as I believe that deeply, then I am in competition with the world. That's it. That's because everything else is a threat to me, because I'm competing for resources, joy, connection, whatever it is, love, against everyone else. Whereas, and I am aware that I haven't like answered the question about what awakening is, but awakening is very much waking up from that erroneous belief. So, well, what you wake up to, that's where it becomes a bit more tricky to describe, because that's what you have to kind of experience. But if you can imagine that the belief is, I'm this closed, solid, separate entity, and everyone and everything else is the same. It's just solid entities. Let's do it like this way: solid entities, me and you, and we just bang into each other, and we push each other around with our words and our actions. That's the belief, isn't it? Very
Mm.
objective, material way of seeing things. And baked into that is a world of suffering. So it doesn't really matter how much money you've got, how much or how little anything you've got. The teachings around awakening are saying that if it comes, whatever arises, it ceases, it goes. And if you're attached to that thing when it goes, you'll suffer.
Yeah.
That's kind of the root of it. So if we're able to wake up from that belief that I'm this solid thing, what we awaken to is, I mean, you could say the truth of non-separation,
Yeah.
but that doesn't really make any sense to the mind, because the mind can't imagine that. The dualistic mind can't imagine that, but it can be experienced. But what it feels like is connection. It no longer is there a delusion that we're separate. you feel intimately connected, and therefore competition just goes blah, it just like it dissipates. Like, who am I competing with? There's no, if we're all this, then it makes no sense to compete because I'm just competing against myself. So then
Yeah.
what comes online are things like collaboration, kindness, compassion, friendship, connection. They naturally arise because, well, that's the language of connection, isn't it? As opposed to competition, winning, war, feuding, enmity. That's the language of disconnection, being separate. So certainly my experience, that's been the case.
You know, when you say about we're all connected, right? Which I agree.
Okay.
I think people get lost in that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think add in the practicality again. So we're all connected, and you think, okay, so if I believe that, but the world is like you said, everyone's banging on, and someone does something horrible to me, and I have to forgive them now because we're all connected. But I think when you go to the practical side, which is it is always you versus you. So almost
Yeah.
taking them aside.
Yeah.
Where am I going with this? So take so take it. So if someone does something to you that
Yeah.
you dislike, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
The lesson is within you as to why you dislike that, why you
Yeah.
feel. Because most people are just getting on,
Yeah.
they said something in passing, but you really took it to heart. So
Yeah.
instead of blaming them, which does create that separation, it's kind
Yes.
of looking at why do I feel that way? Actually,
Yeah.
kind of forget
Yeah.
you've done what you've done. You've probably had a bad day. I don't know. Uh,
Yeah.
but really, then looking at yourself, why is it that triggers me? Why do I feel?
Mm.
Like for me, that take because I don't want to get too caught up in the we're all connected because sometimes it is hard to see that when the life is so unjust. But I try to take it back to the simple thing of, you know, by hurting you, I'm hurting me,
That's it.
and try
That's
to
it.
keep it as simple as that. Really,
Yeah.
does that make sense?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Beautifully put. Because if you genuinely feel, and so that plays out in two ways as well. I say two ways. It doesn't play out in any way, really. This is all just the mind trying to conceptualize something that's way more directly experienced than that. But actually, yeah, by hurting you, I'm hurting me. You can say, well, actually, like you said, I'm ignoring my own heart and mind states that's causing this. So that's one way. And also, with the truth of awakening, what is seen is that, oh, actually, by hurting you, I am hurting me, because there was never a me separate from you anyway. So actually, it's just all this. It's just all this together arising. And I know that might sound a bit mysterious to people, but the great thing about this process, you don't need to worry about that. You don't need to imagine that stage. You just, like you said, keep it practical, keep working on where you're attached, recognize what is it that's making me suffer in this moment? What is it that I'm trying to fight that I'm assuming is over there? I'm assuming it's that guy and their opinions, or it's normally opinions, isn't it? Sometimes it's actions, but most of the time it's something they've said in opinions. What is it about that that is making me want to go to war with them, whatever it is, So if we're able to reflect inwards, reflect on our own conditioning, that's where freedom lies for sure. Yeah, it's always lying about what we're stuck to.
Yeah, I think if you look closely enough at your own experience,
Mm,
there's probably a theme.
mm. Oh
So
yeah,
thing that does trigger you,
definitely.
I think there's nearly always maybe multiple themes.
I think always multiple themes, really. Like, yeah, but you might find a thread, like a strain for sure. Like some of the common, more, could say, the coarser, more like fully felt themes in our life, they become quite apparent. So one might be um, like fear of rejection. So whenever people reject me, there's then a big response of anger towards them because I'm trying to protect myself. So that's a theme a lot of people could probably resonate with. So you
Yeah.
might feel those, but actually that's just one of many, you could say, infinite number of ways we've been conditioned in our lives, isn't it? So yeah, so I think, well, it's been the case for me, might be the case for you, that once you start feeling into these themes and they start loosening a little bit, you know, that grasping to attachment, whatever it is, grasping to rejection, then other more subtle things start coming out to play. And you go, oh, okay, there's more stuff underneath it. Let's
Yeah.
yeah. So it's just a continually ripening process.
I was reading a book recently. I forgot her name. I wish I remembered her name. But it's basically along the lines of doing the work. So it's about
Mm,
childhood, you know, going back to your
I
childhood.
know who it is. Oh, what is it called? The Work.
Doing the work or the work or something like
I
that.
think I know who
Nicole,
it.
I think.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'll find out who it is. Yeah, I know of the book. Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading that, and one of what I've come to realize is one of my sort of things is when I feel I'm not considered, right? And that can be a billion things in the real world that come into this one bracket. It could be someone cutting me up,
Yeah.
you know, as simple as that, or someone not inviting me to their wedding. Like it could be about, you know, I feel I haven't been considered, and until I realised and actually put, you know, a meaning to that specifically, and had specific words, so I can sort of identify it and isolate it. It was like so many things would annoy me or bother me or upset me. I never really knew. And then I started to sort of bring it all together. And then I was reading this book, and this is one of the things she talks about. So sometimes things just come your way at the right time. And this was one of them. And I was reading a book, and she was talking about, I don't know if it was her girlfriend or her wife, I can't remember. But she would come home, and the girlfriend didn't do the washing up, and it used to really annoy her, and she'd get really frustrated and angry. And then she realized it's because she identified that situation as, you've not considered me.
Yeah.
So her partner would keep saying, why'd you get so annoyed about the washing up? But she didn't really know why. It just turned into this thing, and no one really could identify what it actually was. So you're kind of getting all heated and arguing and getting annoyed about who knows what, because we haven't identified it yet. And then she's realized, I you not doing the washing up is symbolic, or you know, it's a symbol for me subconsciously of you not considering me.
Yeah.
And I'm the same. If I come home, because my missus works from home, and if I feel like she's left the house in a bit of a mess, I get triggered. And I
Mm,
had exactly this experience for years, and now I can really kind of look at it, and now I'll just say to her, look, you know what it is. It's because I feel you haven't considered me. And then
yeah.
I can take myself aside and say, you're annoyed because you wasn't considered. But you know she's considering you. She's told
Yes.
you. We've had this
Mm,
conversation.
yeah.
It kind of diffuses that situation.
Yeah.
It sort of makes me think, how many people aren't aware of this?
Oh
How
yeah.
many
Completely.
fights, you know,
Yeah.
even going to the extreme of
Yeah.
violence, is
Yeah.
that could be because of something so simple,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
butting heads. But really, if we kind of knew this,
Yeah.
be a lot easier, because you would go in and go, I'm annoyed because you said this thing that you didn't really mean, but
Mm,
I identify, you
yeah.
know, that situation as a personal attack when it's not. So I'm actually going to calm down, and I'm not going to get
Yeah.
annoyed, and I'm just going to get on with my business, and so are you, and we've just avoided this situation.
Yeah. It's just the littlest of things, isn't it? It's just like everyday things that really they seem to more than anything with the people closest to us, the people that we love the most. The small things seem to have an ability to kind of push our buttons in a way. Well, it seems disproportionate, doesn't it? But I think it's because it points back to these early crucial relationships in life where we've been conditioned. You know, there's that these intimate relationships is where we've learned what love is, what consideration is. You know, and if we have past examples of not having our needs met, so let's say those needs are needs to be heard, considered, feel loved, feel like there's protection available when I feel scared. That's a good example, isn't it? And it's what every child needs. But if
Yeah.
they're slightly missing in some regard, or that relationship isn't quite healthy in some regard, that plays out in relationship archetypes, just exactly like you said. So it might seem in the moment I'm feeling like you're not considering me. But if we're able to feel more deeply, you'll recognize that feeling of, let's say it's here. This is just an example because it's always in the body. But let's say in a moment it's felt here. I'll point to it like here. Let's say it's felt here. The more we're able to explore that without the story of me, like you, because when you were talking there, you were saying, I feel this, I feel that. It's personal, it feels personal. Can you see how the I is the center of all of this?
Yeah.
So without the story of I, what's the sensation? What's the experience of non-consideration? And that's where it starts to get really interesting because, like, oh, it's not what I thought it was. It's this other thing, which is quite difficult to describe, but it's got, instead of it being this very thin, not very deep story that's just like A equals B equals C equals D, what it opens up is this, very deep, complex, experiential thing that really invites exploration. And when I've started exploring those, I've started noticing, oh, this goes back quite far actually. It's like this argument with my partner about the dishes, this isn't about that at all. What's the root of this is way deeper, and often I can't see what the root is. And this is why it's quite scary for a lot of people, because it's much easier for people to tell a story about the self that's narrow and relatable, and we've heard a lot of times before, because we can predict it and we can say, well, I'm the kind of person that in this environment feels like this, so in the future I'm going to try and do this and I'm going to try and do that. You can see it's kind of what we were pointing to before, isn't it? Leaving the moment to go into the story to try and give a sense of safety by imagining a future.
Yeah.
But by going into the unnamed sensation of lack of consideration, oh, that's mysterious and it's deep and I can't see the bottom of it. I don't know how deep it goes. So you can see why a lot of people don't want to go there. They're just like, no, fuck that. That is way weird. Like, I'd rather just believe that I can read a few self-help books and figure out coping mechanisms and strategies to get better at being a self that isn't as triggered.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's tricky. I mean, I feel it for a lot of people, but the freedom that we were talking about in Awakening is freedom from all of that.
Yeah.
It's freedom from that mechanism that believes that I have to be central to this story and that anything could be personal. Like, because it's never, like you said, it's never personal. It's just people trying to get about their day normally, just trying to get on and trying to live without too much ouchiness. And yet somehow it happens to me and I go, oh, me, oh, me.
I was
Whereas,
just gonna say, you actually realise most people just don't care.
no, they don't give a shit. Yeah. Like,
Do something embarrassing for you, it's traumatic. You'll hold on to that for years. People got over it 5 minutes ago because they're too busy doing their own thing or laughing at
exactly.
the next person, or
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. And that's the thing about, you could say, doing this kind of thing, speaking in public. We're not in public, but like, actually there's a lot of fear around the self and how the self will be viewed. But all the things that the self is worried about, people don't care. They're not people. So for instance, people are not listening to a podcast to try and pull apart the persona of the podcast host. That's not what's going on.
They're not
They're
that
just,
important.
no, exactly.
Yeah.
They're just probably cooking dinner, wanting a bit of something to mull over.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because to the self, if it's very fixed and very rigid, it can feel like life and death sometimes, can't it? It can feel like, oh, this is really important. And if I get it wrong, well, in fact, I can't even imagine getting it wrong because that is too much of a failure to imagine.
Yeah.
Whereas if we're able to see underneath or see through or let go of that self-referential mechanism, then life just becomes a bit easier. It just becomes a bit easier. We're not always trying to protect our imagined selves. We're able to just be with whatever's arising in a moment, even if that is, the pain of neglect, for instance.
Yeah. I have a question. Just going back to something you said a moment ago.
Yeah.
You said, say, this emotion you've got here,
Yeah.
and it's easier just to read a few self-help books and learn how to cope with it, right? What if let's flip that on its head. what if you do want to get to the bottom of it?
Yeah.
Because I felt in my experience, pushing too hard
Yes,
can also yield you zero results.
I agree.
So what would you recommend to say if you did have any clients or, you
Yeah.
know, even yourself in your own experience? What do you do in that situation?
It's interesting because everybody's different, and the people that I work with are all different with varying degrees of conditioning. So, like you were saying, some people, it's clear to me very quickly because I know it in myself. Actually, we can't dig. Whatever this is, whatever we're pointing to, this deeper pain, it's not, digging's not going to be good for it. So inquiring into it's not going to be good for it. But I would always recommend working with someone you can trust, someone who's appropriate. So if it's kind of like just general, how to describe this? Let's say you're coming into some emotional material when you're on the path of awakening. You're trying to do inquiries and untangle from the knot of self-referential mind. Maybe a session with someone like me, as an example. Doesn't have to be me, but someone like me who's been through the process can be really beneficial.
Mm.
If, however, you're coming into contact with feelings of, and these are normally characterized by the symptoms of PTSD. So if you're coming into contact with things like deep despair, uh, not just anxiety, but like deep, deep fear, shaking, maybe embodied, like sweating, nervous system kind of freakouts. Another one is like the body just crying all the time,
Yeah.
feelings of nausea, extreme headaches. These are just some examples. It can be any of these. But if you come into contact with those as well, it's worthwhile speaking to a professional for
Mm.
sure, because they are equipped both in experience and practice and training to meet those kind of emotional responses with care, with trauma informed care. So I think it's a bit of a balance. Some of the things we can invite ourselves to feel into more deeply, because actually that's what this process is just feeling into life as deeply as we can, really. But sometimes you might get an experience where, oh, actually this is too dangerous, as in like it doesn't, when I try to feel into it, something very, it's like not a gentle opening. It's more,
Pandora's.
yeah, yeah, or often like a defense mechanism will kick back in. What will often happen, especially with people with addiction issues, is relapse.
Mm.
If you push too hard, you will relapse.
Yeah.
So be very gentle if you're coming into contact with core traumas from early in life. Back off, have a rest. I would say stop the non-dual exploration for a bit. So that's really good advice. So many people have convinced themselves that they're going to get a non-dual awakening and get rid of all this. You're not. That's not how it works. You
Yeah.
might awaken to deeper truths about the nature of this and about yourself, but this emotional material that's baked into a lot of people, it takes time and patience and compassion and care to gently unbind from. So yeah, just back off a
What the-
little bit.
I think it's a lifetime's work in a lot of
For
sense. Like
sure.
you're not going
For
to get it
sure.
in 5 minutes. You just
No.
get better and better at understanding.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I did a video recently talking about why awakening will not suddenly heal your trauma. That's because awakening, you could say, is awakening through insight into the nature of truth. That doesn't give you much to hang on. What I mean there is in like the mind is no longer shackled by a set of views. And through that insight, the breaking of the shackles, there's an awakening to seeing things more closely in line with truth. But
Mm.
that doesn't uncondition your body. If your body's been conditioned over 30 years of abuse, that's going to take a while. I mean, that's just the nature of it. And no matter how sharp your insight and inquiries are, like you just mentioned, a lot of the time, this wounded child in us does not need to be inquired into a corner. It needs gentle connection and collaboration, and often, I would say most of the time, doing it with somebody else is really, really important.
Do you find that some people can almost be addicted to this process? like stone will be unturned. You know, they're going to just keep digging and digging. And I felt a little bit guilty of this myself.
Yeah, me
And
too.
this is why when I was away, because I was so busy with the wedding life, I didn't think much. I just got on with it.
Yeah.
It was when I was away and I had a lot of time in my head, and that's why I was thinking, I'm here and I'm not happy. Why? And that's when I started. I almost kind of just gave up on that, and I thought, now I'm just going to do something practical, and I'm just going to
Yeah.
focus on that, and just to control, like I said, like we said at the beginning, just control my mind and all of this. And yeah, it has been great. I'm almost talking like I'm really depressed. I'm not at all, but
You're
yeah,
not talking like that. You're talking honestly. Well, you're not, and that's the thing, is that there's a big part of having these conversations is the truth of suffering. Is that it's there. It's part of the mind identified experience, and we got to work with it. And being as authentic as possible gives us the best chance to unbind from it. So it doesn't sound to me like you're depressed. Yeah,
yeah. My issue, and this is what I've realised over the years, I like to punish myself. That's what it is. So if I the one of the reasons I go to the gym so much,
mm,
I'm not really too bothered about the physical side of it.
yeah,
It's more I don't I'll beat myself up. So the amount I'm going to beat myself up is worse than just going.
yeah,
So I just go. You
yeah,
know, so I've learned, and I've done this my whole life, is I'm so disciplined with things, but I just punish myself. So by having 2.5 weeks away and just actually living in the moment,
mm,
I will, through the back door, like I said, it's not a conscious thing, it's through the back door, punish myself.
mm,
And I've started now to realize I'm doing that thing again, and I'm just
yeah,
going to push it away. I'm going to allow myself to just
yeah,
myself, and I'm almost going to push, like I'm going to allow myself to just enjoy myself. If that makes any sense.
yes,
I'm going to just push away the need to be in control to when I'm back home, because then I do need to be in control because I've got to pay a mortgage and I've got to live
yeah,
my life, work and things. So just yeah, I was just learning in on that holiday just to get out my own way. Really, that's
yeah,
the practical side. But I think that I could imagine that people would be addicted to
yeah,
this thing, and who can be the most spiritual,
yeah,
who can be the most awake, and who can dig the deepest. Do
yeah,
you ever kind of come across anyone like that in your experience?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and I guess the question you've just asked is exactly right. So you ask that about yourself. Who can be the most spiritual? Try and find someone. If you want to go that way, try and find someone here that can be the most spiritual. Try and find the one, the apparent self, that can be the most awake. And it just falls over very, very quickly because you just, yeah, it becomes very clear in experience when once you start asking questions like that, that other than thoughts, there's nothing, and that other than a story about who that is, you can't really hang your hat on any of it, really, can you? But yeah, it's just another example of that competitive conditioning that is really rife in the world, isn't it? So and it's natural. It's nobody's fault. It's thousands of years old. We've been in competition for such a long time. A lot of people, have you heard a lot of people talk about human nature and then them saying that human nature is naturally competitive, and you've got all these books like Animal Farm and stuff like that. Well, actually, they're missing the deepest aspect of human nature, which is collaboration, altruism, and connection, working in community. There would be no humanity without that. That
Mm.
was the precursor to all of this.
Yeah.
So actually, there's a very strong, if you're just talking about from a practical sense, there's a very strong argument to say, well, human nature is collaborative, it's connecting, it's altruistic. We help each other and we share the highs and the lows with each other. We support each other
Yeah.
because that's what allowed our communities and our society to grow. Um, but it's difficult, though, isn't it? Because it's such a pervasive uh, narrative that we hear in a world that everyone's an enemy and we've got to compete. That we think we need to be on guard all the time. A bit exactly what you've just described. You've gone on holiday, and you had to give yourself permission only because you felt yourself suffering. You had to just give yourself permission. No, for this 2 weeks, I'm just going to allow myself to let the guard down just a little bit. And with that was some relative ease in comparison to the guard being up. But
Yeah.
what's interesting is what you said is, and what, but actually, no, I do need to keep my guard up because I've got bills to pay. I've got this, I've got that. Is that true? Is that actually true? Other than a belief of the mind, that doesn't mean you don't have these things to pay. You do, but is there any evidence that you can't do that without being locked in this worrying mindset? And that's the thing that we can explore, isn't it? I'm not saying it is or isn't. I don't know. Everyone's got their own conditioning, but they're certainly the things that I've explored in my life. Like all these things that I thought were crucial for me to worry about and plan. Do I need to? Do I really need to? What if I let go of one thing at a time and see how that feels? And you'll be surprised at what might show up, because actually letting go of that one thing results in a, like you pointed out before, a body sensation. It's like, oh, well, I've decided to let go of that planning, but now my body's feeling odd. There's a sensation in the body. What is it? Oh, maybe it's fear, as an example. So then we can start exploring those things.
Yeah, I've definitely learned, because I used to worry a lot about the future.
Yeah,
And
me too.
people would always say, if you can't control it, why worry about it? And my answer, because I'm a smart ass, was always, well, why would I worry about things I can control? I'll just control it. So I'm going to worry about the things I can't control.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll find a way to.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
what I've kind of learned, actually, and I have to remind myself of this, but I'm trying to live this, and in some ways I am living this, actually.
Yeah.
And that's to trust that whatever happens,
Mm.
the me of the future in that moment, and I've got years and years, decades of data to prove this as a fact to myself.
Yes.
I will figure it out.
Yeah.
I'll be equipped enough to figure it out. Just like every year in my life, when things have happened, I have managed to figure it out. So that's like allowed me to, let go of that and just go, do you know what, Jack? I trust you, mate, because I know you've done it before.
Yeah.
And also I trust this, because it provides things at the right time.
Yes.
And can I just tell you a quick story, actually, of how I first got into going back to practical meditation, right? So when we was on holiday, we went to a national park and we did a safari. It was great. But the day before and the evening of, we was literally in the middle of nothing going on. There's a little restaurant. The hotel was pretty much empty. So you were totally in your head at that point. And I actually booked a session. A guy who I've had on the show, Edward, I booked a session with him whilst I was away. Just because, like I said, I was kind of in my head a lot. I didn't have much going on. And I was seeing things popping up. And I thought, do you know what? Maybe now's a good time, whilst it's quiet, whilst I'm away from life back home, to explore this, right? And we were talking about this, and the conversation was very much, he's got a master's, or he's about to get his master's in psychology, and he's a hypnotherapist.
Cool.
So very qualified, really good guy. And we was talking about all of these things, and it was very much along the lines of, you have to trust the universe, man. You have to trust, because you don't really have a choice. And look back through your life, you could probably say, hand on heart, it's kind of all worked out. And almost whatever's happening in your life is happening for you. And that's like the key of the conversation. It's happening for you. Learn to be more in your head. Maybe go back to a bit of meditation. That was the conversation. So anyway, we've finished the call. And I've gone to the pool, and like I said, this hotel was dead. And I said to the wife, I said, do you want to go for a walk? I'll tell you how the call went, and just, the insight from it. All of a sudden, this random woman come running over. Excuse me, are you guys English? And we're like, yeah. And she goes, I've just got here with my son, he's 8. It's me and him. In this hotel, it's just a bunch of dudes who run it. I've not seen any women. There's no one. You're the first people I've seen. I'm a little bit insecure, in this environment. How long have you been here? Is it safe? Between is it safe?
Nice. Yeah.
We've calmed her down, and I said, oh, where you staying? She said, oh, in this room. I said, oh, we're like 2 away. if you feel uncomfortable, give us a knock. You know, we're right there. And she said, oh, you know, nice to meet you. What are you doing tonight? We said, look, there's only one restaurant in the hotel. Probably get some dinner, have an early night. And she said, should we have some dinner together? So we said, okay, yeah, 7 o'clock, we'll meet you. Got talking to her. She's asking us what we do, all of this. And I said, well, what do you do? And she goes, I'm a transcendental meditation coach.
Nice.
So I've messaged Edward. I said, you will never believe this. You said about trust the universe, go with it, and maybe do a bit of meditation. Within 3 minutes of sitting there, this random transcendental meditation coach.
Yeah.
So we spent the next sort of hour or two talking about meditation, and
Brilliant.
that's basically set me off,
Yeah.
you know, to doing, you know, like I said, just the daily practice, keep it simple, loads of research on it, bought a book while I was away, read that, and here we are. Yeah. So just an example. Just go with it, get out of your own head. And
I agree. Yeah, there's a couple of things that you've mentioned there that are really nice. Like, so one of the things being, there's nothing quite like being in the world with others and giving our attention and kindness to others that makes us feel more alive and more at ease. Actually, it's just a really like that it feels to me like the heart yearns to do that. Like just the open heart, the natural, awake, peaceful heart. It's most at peace when connecting with others without needing anything in return. You know, so someone's come to you saying, I need help, the heart responds, doesn't it? It goes, yeah, okay, I can help. Isn't that a sweet feeling? Like so much sweeter than what's going on up here? Am I going to wake up? Am I going to see through delusion? Blah, 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 blah. Just naturally in the moment, you've got this beautiful arising of two people, looking for support and supporting each other. So that's beautiful. And then also just like the availability to notice what the universe wants to show us. And it's definitely been the case for me, is that I started to recognize, oh, it's been doing it all along. I just didn't notice. Like, it's just like it kept giving me opportunity. Just like, no, fuck you, man. I'm not listening. I'm just going to snort this line and I'm just going to do this, you know. But then when you start really paying attention, you're going, oh, wow, there's something. And it might start to sound a little bit like mysticism or like a bit weird, like a bit magical. Certainly to the practical mind, it starts sounding a little bit odd. But all I can say is, well, it's way beyond anything I can think up. You know, the actuality of what's unfolding for all of us, it's way beyond anything we can imagine. Way beyond it. So like you said, we're able to trust that, then often it's fortuitous. It brings us deeper into connection with ourselves, with each other, or provide us with opportunities we could never have predicted. Such as this conversation. Like, there's no way I could have predicted a year ago that this would have been unfolding. Not a chance. You know, and people I've met online and working with face to face in like doing one-to-one sessions, the interviews I've had with people, there's no way it wasn't on the radar a year ago. It just wasn't there. But I just kept trusting the moment, and the moment was like, okay, well, this is how we're going to unfold now. It's like, oh, okay, let's go in that direction. And it seems that the more we trust it, the easier it gets, the easier life gets, I think.
I think just on that point, it can work in both ways as well. And this probably needs to be emphasized, at least from my experience. Opportunity sounds fluffy, it sounds great. But also lessons, which are also opportunities.
Yes,
but
exactly.
Normally, and it's normally to do with tragedy. Like I always say, you know, every good story ever told or every good movie always started with a tragedy. And if you see someone who runs a random business in something that they're passionate about, that you've heard of, and you say, oh, how'd you get into that? Oh, years ago I had a boating accident and we nearly died, and then it led me to this, and then that, and now I do this, and I was an accountant before, and now I love to do this. You know, so just going with that, and I'm so guilty of it throughout my life, where I've been so rigid, and I think we all are. Like I said, paying the mortgage, you know, bills to pay, expectations, societal expectations. we think people are going to think of us, judging ourselves, you know, even self-belief. Do I believe I could do that? But when we like really just get out of the way and just kind of allow it, it really is crazy. But the universe, you know, you could go into the law of attraction stuff, you know, but I think what we could probably all agree on is the like reality does interact with us to some degree.
Well, it is us, isn't it? Like, I mean, that's the beautiful thing is that. So yes, I agree with you. Yes, it does. And the truth of it, when it starts being felt into more and more deeply, is it's way more in depth and complex and mysterious than that. Like that in itself sounds mysterious, doesn't it? And kind of intertwining. It's infinitely more than that. Like because it is us. There's no separation here between reality and this. There's no me other than this moment. Like, and again, it might sound a little bit kind of wacky, but you start to feel that, you start to live that. It becomes apparent in experience. So actually, because I used to be quite materialistic with my view of the world. You know, I wasn't like into material goods, but certainly into like science and kind of reductionist. And I've gone to philosophy for quite a lot, as well as meditation. And I still love science. I love that exploration into the practical, physical. I'm going to use that term loosely, but the physical world, the world that the mind projects as physical. And I often think back to that guy that I was that was really into that, and think, oh, wouldn't it be interesting for him to hear me now? You just think, what a weirdo hippie. Like, it's just so funny because I started to recognize, oh, I don't have to get rid of anything, but I can open up to everything. So I don't have to get rid of the scientific view of the world. It's incorporated and included in the non-dual, you could say, awakened truth of the moment. But actually, I remember at some point a few years ago, I started to realize, oh yeah, all bets are off. Actually, once you start feeling into like anything's possible, like anything's possible. So yeah, not too much in the conspiracy side of things, but when people tell me about their experience now, I just go, no matter how wacky it is, it's like, yeah, that's yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm not surprised, but in the past I would have been just shut that down and said, not a chance. But now I'm just like, yeah, I can see how that could manifest, maybe, yeah, for sure. Like who knows? So and that's a nicer way to live as well, because actually there's a lot of mystery and intrigue and curiosity then, as opposed to saying, oh no, the world is just this way. And now it's like, I don't know how the world is, but I'm willing to be shown more and more.
Yeah. You know, as you just said, like, well, we were saying earlier about things like anxiety or these thoughts, there's like no beginning and end. It just kind of, blends in. I think that's probably our how we intertwine with reality, because it is, I believe anyway, when I go into the depths of it, I think that reality is like a projection of the inner you reflecting back at you, right? So when we say we're all connected, that's the way I see it from like a deeper level, right? But there is no beginning or end to that, because it is. So, when you speak to like these materialistic or material reductionist, atheist science type of people, prove God. It's like you can't, because it's not isolated of this. It is this. That makes sense. So this is why the only way to really see creation or see the universe or see, God, whatever people want to brand it as, is to go in and realize how you interact with it, and you are part of it, because you can't isolate it, and you can't go here, there it is. But when you do accept this, you see creation every day. And sometimes I laugh. Recently, there's a guy, Terence, what's his name? He was just on Joe Rogan yesterday.
I'm not sure.
What's his name? He was a Hollywood actor. He was in like Iron Man and What Dreams May Come, which is a great film. He's been in loads of films.
Okay. Yeah.
And basically, I got into him a while ago, and I because he was an actor, and then he went down all these rabbit holes and he got into the spiritual side, and he talks a lot about metaphysics and stuff. So I was looking into him, and then I put him to one side, and then all of a sudden he's on Joe Rogan, and now everyone's talking about him.
Yeah.
But a few months ago, when I discovered that's what he's into,
Yeah.
no one really knew, no one cared.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden, it's the biggest podcast in the world, and I just kind of laugh. I'm just like, it's just funny how things like that happen. It's just so,
It's,
I'm going to go into the nuts and bolts of it, but it's so weird.
Well, you can't predict any of it. That's it. Like it's it's impossible to know why these conditions have unfolded the way that they are. Yeah, I think, and I guess maybe this is some of the pitfalls of having conversations like we're having now, or talking about any of this stuff is, and what you're probably feeling into is that the mind that contextualizes the world is infinitely creative. So it can create infinite context, which means infinite fodder to talk about. You cannot run out.
Saying, look, man, I've been on for an hour and 20.
No. As in, like, I'm happy to do, and it's not that it's bad, but I think we need to notice what role the mind plays in painting the universe, because there is a subtle trap that we can fall into on a path of awakening, where it seems that now the mind's kind of creating the context of truth, higher truth, transcendence, awakening, and that's so much more alluring than things like, well, for me now anyway, than like cars or jobs or women, that kind of thing. But still, it's we don't rest in that. We won't find freedom there. We can't find freedom from suffering in that which comes and goes. So anything that arises, like a thought or a context, or it just goes. It comes and it goes. That's its nature, and that's beautiful, because that's creativity in action, isn't it? Just infinitely creative. That's why we get art and literature and dance and all these beautiful expressions of humanity, like infinitely just unfolding. But the moment we try to find anything lasting or solid, like you said at the beginning, it just slips through your fingers. You cannot grab the phenomena or grab the experience. So the path of freedom is being from the grasping, like being free from the grasping action that's trying to concretize experience. So yeah, I guess the reason I mention it is because we can engage in conversations like this really joyfully, and we know it's not the truth. We know it can never ever touch truth, because the truth that it's not lasting truth anyway, is it? Because look, everything we've just said is gone. Where is it? It's nowhere to be found. Maybe it's in some ones and zeros somewhere on a database as you're recording it, but like, it's just ephemeral stuff. But if we're trying to rely upon that to give us lasting satisfaction, then we'll fail again and again. So we're looking for that isn't dependent upon coming and going, that isn't dependent upon having the right idea or the right opinion, the right view of the world. It's a piece that's a bit simpler and a bit deeper than that.
Do you find that with like your own sort of enlightenment, it comes and goes? You get moments where you're like, I got it, and then it slips away, and or peace, even peace, moments of like pure joy. Like I was the other day for no reason at all, and I just had a moment. Like I didn't cry as in physically, but I kind of cried a bit. I just had this overjoy of just happiness and tearful joy. And then it kind of just withered away and it was gone. And you can't hold on to it. You just experience it and then it's just gone.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? So like the term enlightenment's a funny one, isn't it? It's a tricky one to deal with, especially as a Buddhist. I say as a Buddhist, it's not like I identify as a Buddhist. It's just I've been practicing in Buddhism for a long time. The Buddhist teachings. Whereas the term enlightenment is kind of front and center in a lot of Buddhist traditions, isn't it? The Buddha's enlightenment. But then you start to realize at a point in the path is like, oh, it's not like that at all. Like what the thing I was chasing, the enlightenment, it's not like that. Now, that doesn't mean to say things aren't enlightened. The nature of existence, nature of experience isn't lit up. So it's clearly seen without delusion. Yet there is that, but it's not a bit like you were mentioning, it's not a thing that you get. So it doesn't it's not like a lasting, solid thing. But what it is a way of being in the world without delusion or unnecessary suffering, mind identified suffering. So the moment continually lights up. It's continually, you are continually shown the way this is. I say you, there's no you, but in experience, it's experienced clearly. And with that clarity is that, oh, look, there are conditions coming and going. I know that if I grab that, it's gonna hurt. If I try to hang on to this stuff, it's just going to cause suffering because I see clearly now the nature of conditions. So that movement, you could talk about the reactivity that we were talking about before, that movement to try and fix, to get safety, to get security, to fix onto something, that movement just withers and it backs off. So that's where peace lies. There's an ability to be with experience, seeing the coming and going, being the coming and going without the grasping, without the trying to make something more of it than it is.
Yeah.
Does that? I don't know if that answers your question, actually, Jay. But
no, I think so. I did bring up another question actually that I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
Because you're quite solid in this sort of philosophy of, how your personal philosophy, which, as you said, you've practiced Buddhism, you don't necessarily identify, but your philosophy on the world, the way you interact with the world, it seems pretty solid. I'm in and out. I still live in a stressful world.
Yes.
I'm a bit of a conspiracy guy, but I dip in, I dip out. So I'm a bit more fluid around, I go through seasons almost. So in terms of like where you are in your day to day, so we can sit on a podcast, we're very chilled, we've had a really good conversation. It's very easy to say these things, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
When life does kind of kick you in the kahunas, something happens like a health scare or someone passes or things like this, you get a tax bill through. Do you still get the reaction of a normal person? You get that and then you calm yourself down based on your experience, or are you just a bit more kind of mellow and you're just like, okay, I'll figure this out.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Is that
it does, yeah. I mean, just to be clear, I'm a normal person. So like no, it's like, you've got a YouTube channel, you must know something. Yeah, like but yeah, so like and actually and I've spoken about this quite often on my own with my own content, is that actually life is a messy thing. Pain, as in like the pain of loss and sorrow that you just described, grief, it happens to everyone without exception. That is the human experience. You don't get out of it. You can't get out of it. If you do get out of it, I would say you're probably not living.
You're probably dead.
Or you're completely delusional. You're just wrapped in the mind. But what there isn't is this trying to imagine it as something other than it is. So, like when a loved one very close to me passes away, I deeply, deeply feel it. It's like, yeah, it hurts. It hurts right here in the body completely. But what happens now often is that these emotions quite naturally unfold and change and move through the body over time. And I'm not trying to fix it, stop it from happening. It just naturally unfolds. And often, there's no trace remaining. Often there's no trace remaining. It's worth bearing in mind, I'm talking about current experiences that I go through at the moment. What's fascinating is that there is a trace energetically remaining from early childhood trauma. And this is where it gets really interesting, is that actually in this, as it is now, as I experience life now, yeah, there's sorrow and there's pain and there's occasional stickiness, but then I feel the stickiness and then it just kind of moves through. But yeah, and there's joy, there's laughter, all of these things arise naturally and pass away naturally in their own time. Yet, interestingly, there's this echo from early childhood trauma where there's still a deep part of me, you could say physically, emotionally, energetically, which is, yeah, attached. You could say attached. It's hard to describe because it's going back to maybe pre-verbal experiences, experiences before I was able to speak or able to understand context of any kind. Yet the body keeps a score, so the body remembers. So then, what will happen? A bit like you described before, a very simple incident might happen that's just enough hallmarks. It was like the way the body was conditioned early on, and what I'll feel is sometimes deep dread, deep despair, life and death survival kick in, and not up here, like in the body. It's like, oh, what is that? And then often that tries to drive the mind to fix the situation, as in like to try and imagine something other than that, maybe overthinking, ruminating, those kind of things. But I'm very close to the experience now. Um, so I'm often able to feel it in the body. But yeah, it's a fascinating thing. So I am, working with somebody, a professional, with regards to that, because I know that I can't unbind from this on my own. It's very, very deep and shadowy and difficult to see. And no amount of prodding and inquiry will unfold it. So actually working in relation with a professional has been really beneficial so far. It's helping me to see a bit more clearly that reactivity.
Yeah, I think that's a good point actually. So even someone with, that I guess would, um, the way that you sort of show yourself to the world is someone who has probably quite a deep understanding of self, but you're still working with someone.
Oh yeah,
I
for
find that
sure.
to be quite interesting. It's,
Yeah,
where I think people that haven't done any of the work are afraid to
yeah,
probably go to someone. So the fact that you are as well is, I asked you at the beginning about awakening. How do you define awakening?
yeah.
And
I can try and answer it again if you want, because I kind of dodged that, didn't I?
well,
Sorry.
I was gonna have a go if you don't mind.
Mm,
I was gonna have a go. Let's see
love
if we're
it.
on the same
Yeah,
wavelength.
yeah, yeah. Okay, let's go.
And and I think this actually, because I asked you before the call, like, well, I mentioned that I believe that spiritual awakening to some degree goes hand in hand with like a bit more of a conspiratorial um like view on the world because
Interesting. Yeah,
but you I don't think you just go down the spiritual route without seeing the injustices and really waking up to what's really going on. And I think the way I would define awakening, and I think this conversation has helped me to do this, and maybe you'll agree with me, is seeing the world for what it is. And that's what I'm getting from you really as well is you're you've accepted the way the world is and you've maybe pulled aside any of the kind of the ego as we mentioned before and these sort of false pretenses and these false beliefs that we've manufactured or conjugated ourselves or society's given to us through programming etc and almost just seeing the world for what it not what it is but like how it really is so aligning yourself with actually the true nature like the
yes,
Tao,
yeah,
as a Taoist would say, like
yes.
the Tao, the flow, the way
Eternal
it
Tao,
really
yeah,
is in,
yes,
the way reality is. Would you say that's a fair,
yeah.
the right path?
It's beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, yeah, yes, and when you think about it, that doesn't tell you anything, does it?
No, not really.
And that's the beauty, and that's the beauty of this path is that yes, that feels exactly right, but how is it? And that cannot be answered.
Yeah,
You cannot answer that. You can wake up to it in experience, and that's done moment by moment. That's not. It's a. I really like. Do you know Angelo DeLulo? He's been like. So he's great. He's kind of like a contemporary, non-dual practitioner. He's done quite a lot for sharing awakening, like a secular awakening approach in the world. He's got a beautiful book called Awake, It's Your Turn, which just strips out all of the religious facets and just really gives people clear guidance on waking up. I would recommend it to kind of everyone if they're interested in this. It's very, very good. Um, but I love the way that he talks about truth. He says you wake up to a living truth. It's like, oh, that's amazing. Because the mind wants to fix truth in place, doesn't it? Which is
Yeah,
delusional because I've never seen anything that's fixed. I've never experienced any fixed thing. It's
yeah,
all change. It's all impermanent. So the truth that we wake up to is a living truth, which means it's beyond our capacity to fix concepts or descriptions on. That
yeah,
doesn't mean it's beyond our capacity to experience and be and wake up to, because we are experiential beings, aren't we?
yeah,
Yet the mind wants to, through its scope of dualism, go, it's like this or it's like that, and obviously that is, if you think about, even just in thought, think about the scope of the universe, which is impossible to do because it's so big.
yeah,
Then how kind of hubristic and how insane is it to think that a bunch of thoughts could encapsulate all of that? A few words in my head, we imagine, can encapsulate the total complexity of the universe, which is unfolding moment by moment for billions of years. Yet we go, oh no, I can put words in an order to say it's like this. Yet we believe that, don't we? We
yeah,
and because of that, we spend so much time trying to find the truth, the mind truth, the knowledgey truth, as opposed to a bit like you said, like yeah, waking up to the way things are.
yeah. Wow, maybe that's a good place to leave it, unless there's anything else you wanted to.
So interesting, isn't it? Because when we start, prior to the conversation, we had a few ideas of where it might go,
Yeah,
but
I
it's not.
tried to keep it on track.
No, but I love it because it's normally a good sign of a great conversation, because that's that, that creative facet that I was talking about before. The mind just wants to go in its own direction, and we want to explore, don't we? So
Yeah.
it's felt like that to me. It's felt like an exploration with you, Jay. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
No, brilliant. I one point I did want to go into, but we haven't had time, and hopefully I can invite you on again to maybe go
Love
into
to.
this.
Yeah, I'd love to.
And that would be your practice. As I said before the call, this was one of the points. What type of meditations you come across that you think are good.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, maybe we can go into that another
Yeah.
time. I think this is a good place to leave it
Yeah.
on, as you said, the way it flowed and
Yeah.
whatnot.
Yeah.
Just re-get the fire going.
Yeah.
It's natural.
I love it. Well, let's do that. Yeah, let's do that again. And a bit like on that practical tip that we've been talking about all the way through. Why not give some just really practical, down to earth tips? A bunch of different resources that people can explore. I think people would, in my experience, people really appreciate that, because just demystifies a lot of stuff, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Nice.
Do you mind telling any of my listeners, anyone who is listening, who you are and
Oh yeah.
where they can find you and what you do,
Yeah, my
and
name.
any plugs or any shout outs?
Of course, yeah. Mine. Any shout outs is a good one. Shout outs is a good one. So my name's Simon Brown. I run a YouTube channel called Awake Here and Now. There's an accompanying Instagram channel as well called Awake Here and Now. Instagram's a bit more like a few random poetry cogitations, but I mean, explore the videos, see if you like them. Usually they're coming from a place of heart-based connection. So what I mean by that is opening up to a richer, more fully felt emotional connection to life and the path, as opposed to, you've probably seen a lot of very inquiry based, very wisdom based. There's a lot of that stuff out there. Really, I wanted to, yeah, explore a bit of humanity. So yeah, with regards to shout outs, I mean, Angelo DeLulo, as I mentioned before, if you've never heard of him, check him out. I would say one of my contemporary teachers is a woman called Tara Brach. So if you've never heard of Tara Brach, she's a phenomenal human being, phenomenal teacher. And yeah, she's got a lot to offer, both in books, videos, meditations, resources. Yeah, she's a beautiful human.
Awesome. Thank you
Nice
very much
one.
for your time.
Cheers. My pleasure, Jay. Speak to you soon.
Speak soon.